In February of 1943, the United States Navy introduced a brand new fighter aircraft into the Pacific War. On paper, it was everything American aviation had been chasing. Faster, stronger, more heavily armed. It was supposed to be the answer to the Japanese Zero. It was supposed to shift the balance of air power in the Pacific. Instead, pilots gave it another name, a killer of its own men. The F4U Corsair looked wrong from the moment you saw it. Its wings bent sharply upward, forming a strange inverted gull shape no other American fighter had ever used. The cockpit sat far back along the fuselage, forcing the pilot to stare over a nose so long it seemed to stretch forever. On final approach to a carrier deck, that nose erased almost everything ahead of you. And then there was the landing behavior. As airspeed dropped, the Corsair had a terrifying habit. The left wing could stall without warning. No shake, no vibration, just sudden loss of lift. When it happened, the aircraft snapped violently to the left, rolling faster than most pilots could react. 9 American aviators were killed attempting carrier landings. The Navy's conclusion was blunt. The Corsair was too dangerous for carrier operations, so they reassigned it. They gave it to the Marines. One of those Marines was a quiet, 26-year-old pilot who had grown up in Brooklyn. His name was Kenneth Ambrose Walsh. He wasn't famous. He wasn't a showman. He wasn't chasing glory. He was just trying to survive. What happened over the next 3 weeks would turn that unknown Marine into a legend and permanently rewrite the story of the F4U Corsair. This is the story of how one pilot took an aircraft the Navy had written off as impossible and used it to shoot down 14 Japanese Zeros, proving that the Corsair was not a death trap, but one of the deadliest fighters of the Second World War. The Corsair was born from ambition and risk. In the late 1930s, as war spread across Europe, American aircraft designers were racing against time. Whoever could build the fastest, most powerful fighter would shape the next war. At Vought Aircraft, engineers set an audacious goal. They wanted to build a single-seat fighter around the largest engine available. That engine was the Pratt & Whitney R285 Double Wasp, a massive, air-cooled radial producing nearly 2,000 horsepower. The moment engineers tried to fit it into a fighter airframe, problems emerged. The engine was enormous. To balance the aircraft, the cockpit had to be pushed far back, nearly toward the tail. To connect that engine to the propeller, the nose had to be extended to an extreme length. This created a new issue. The long fuselage placed enormous stress on the landing gear during touchdown. Vought's solution was radical. They bent the wings upward at the roots, shortening the landing gear while maintaining propeller clearance. The result was the Corsair's now iconic gull-wing design. Nothing like it had ever flown. It looked alien, aggressive, unstable. When the Corsair first flew in 1940, its performance stunned observers. It exceeded 400 miles per hour, faster than any American fighter before it. Its climb rate was exceptional. Its armament, 6.5 Gallima machine guns, could rip enemy aircraft apart in seconds. On paper, it was nearly perfect. In practice, it was unforgiving. In late 1942, the Navy decided to test the Corsair aboard an aircraft carrier. Lieutenant Commander Sam Porter was assigned to land the aircraft on the escort carrier, USS Sangamon. The first issue was visibility. From the cockpit, the landing signal officer, positioned off the port side, was barely visible. The long nose blocked the deck until the very last seconds. Porter began his approach. As the Corsair slowed, disaster struck. The left wing stalled. The aircraft rolled violently toward the sea. Porter fought the controls, managing to recover only feet above the water. He tried again. The same thing happened. 4 attempts, 4 near-fatal rolls. Porter concluded the Corsair could not be safely operated from carriers, but that wasn't the end of its troubles. The cockpit was plagued with problems. Oil from the engine could spray directly onto the windscreen during landing, instantly blinding the pilot. The shock-absorbing landing gear compressed, then rebounded, bouncing the aircraft back into the air, missed the arresting wires, and the Corsair could slam into parked aircraft on the deck. The Navy made its decision, but the Marines saw something different. They didn't operate from carriers. They flew from rough coral strips hacked out of jungle. They didn't need easy airplanes. They needed fighters that could dominate the sky, and the Corsair could do exactly that. In February 1943, 12 F4U Corsairs from Marine Fighting Squadron BMF-124 arrived at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. Most of the pilots had barely 20 hours in the aircraft. They were inexperienced, they were undertrained, and they were about to face the best Japanese fighter pilots in the Pacific. Kenneth Ambrose Walsh didn't look like a legend. He wasn't born into a military dynasty. He didn't grow up dreaming of medals or headlines. There were no stories of childhood heroics or early brilliance. Walsh was born in Brooklyn in 1916, the son of an electrician. His family wasn't wealthy. His future wasn't guaranteed. In 1933, at just 17 years old, he joined the United States Marine Corps for one simple reason: he needed a job. The Marines put him to work as an aircraft mechanic. Day after day, Walsh crawled inside fuselages, worked on engines, replaced cables, patched damage. He learned aircraft not from textbooks, but from broken parts and hard lessons. He learned what failed first, what overheated, what snapped under stress. He learned what killed pilots. For years, Walsh stayed on the ground, watching other men climb into cockpits and disappear into the sky. He listened to pilots talk. He listened to their mistakes. Eventually, he applied for flight training. The Marines reviewed his record. They saw discipline, patience, a mind that understood machines at an intimate level. They approved him. Walsh earned his wings in April 1937. By the time the Pacific War exploded, he wasn't a rookie. He wasn't a prodigy either. He was something rarer, experienced. By early 1943, Walsh had 6 full years of flight time, a lifetime compared to many pilots being rushed into combat with barely a year of training. When VMF-124 deployed to Guadalcanal, Walsh was 26 years old. He was one of the oldest pilots in the squadron, and quietly, one of the most prepared. The squadron barely had time to settle in. Within hours of arrival, they were ordered to prepare for a mission. A PBY Catalina, slow, lumbering, vulnerable, was heading north to rescue 2 downed pilots. It needed fighter escort. The briefing was short. The warning was clear. If Japanese fighters appeared, there would be no margin for error. Walsh climbed into his Corsair, F4U-1, Bureau number 02351V1. Painted beneath the canopy was the number 13. Most pilots avoided that number. Walsh didn't care. That aircraft became his. The mission lasted 9 long hours. No enemy fighters appeared. The rescue succeeded. Every aircraft returned safely. The next day brought another escort mission. Again, nothing. The pilots joked nervously. They knew better than to believe the quiet would last. On the 3rd day, it didn't. VMF-124 was assigned to escort B-24 Liberator bombers flying up the slot, the narrow chain of islands running north through the Solomons. The target was Kahili Airfield on Bougainville. It was a heavily defended Japanese base, and the enemy knew the Americans were coming. Japanese radio intercept units had been monitoring American transmissions. They had advance warning. When the bombers arrived over Kahili, the sky was already waiting for them. Zeros poured in from above, out of the glare, from angles the Americans couldn't see. The escort fighters were outnumbered, outpositioned, outmaneuvered. The engagement was brutal and brief. In less than 15 minutes, the American formation was shredded. 8 bombers went down, 2 Corsairs were lost, 4 P-38s destroyed, 2 P-40s failed to return. The Japanese claimed 4 American fighters. For the Marines, it was catastrophic. The pilots gave it a name. Back in the United States, Navy leadership saw the battle as confirmation. The Corsair was a mistake. Too dangerous. Too unforgiving. Outmatched by the Zero, Walsh landed back at Henderson Field alive, but shaken. This was his first real taste of combat. The illusion of control vanished instantly. The war wasn't heroic. It was chaotic, violent, unfair. For the next 2 months, VMF-124 flew limited missions. Commanders slowed the tempo. Pilots trained obsessively. They analyzed every engagement, every mistake, every death. Walsh focused on the Corsair itself. He learned what it could do and what it could not. The Zero could outturn almost anything at low speed, but the Corsair had advantages the Zero couldn't match. Speed, dive performance, climb rate. Walsh realized the truth. If you slowed down, you died. If you turned with a Zero, you died. But if you stayed fast, above 250 miles per hour, the Corsair became dominant. Hit hard, climb away, reset, never stay. Walsh shared what he learned. The squadron listened. Slowly, the rookies became fighters. By late April 1943, VMF 1944 was ready to test its new doctrine, and Walsh was about to fire the Corsair's guns in anger for the first time. On April 1st, VMF 124 was flying combat air patrol over the Russell Islands. The mission was routine: climb to altitude, hold position, watch empty sky and open ocean. These were the missions pilots hated the most: long hours of nothing, followed by seconds of terror if something went wrong. Kenneth Walsh was leading a 4-plane section. The radio was quiet. The sky was clear. The patrol felt endless. Then everything changed. An Army Air Force's flight of P-38 Lightnings had just been relieved from patrol and was heading back toward base. Behind them, coming fast from the north, was a large Japanese formation, 20 Zeros, maybe more. The P-38 pilots didn't see them. The sun was wrong. The angle was wrong. The Zeros were climbing from below, using glare and altitude to hide their approach. Walsh saw them. He didn't call for permission. He didn't wait for instructions. From 15,000 feet, Walsh and his wingmen dove straight into the enemy formation. The Corsair accelerated violently. 400 miles per hour. 450. Faster than the Zero pilots expected. Faster than they could react. Walsh picked a target. 1-0 climbing hard, unaware. The Japanese pilot looked up at the last moment. There was no time to evade. Walsh fired a short burst. Every fifth round was a tracer, creating a solid stream of fire that walked across the Zero's fuselage. The enemy fighter came apart in midair. No spin, no recovery, just wreckage falling toward the sea. Walsh pulled up sharply, climbing back toward altitude. He didn't turn, he didn't chase. He remembered the rule. Fast and high. Another Zero flashed in front of him. Walsh rolled, dove again, and fired. The second Japanese fighter shuddered, then erupted into smoke and flame. 2 kills. Walsh climbed again, bleeding speed only at the last possible moment. Below him, chaos filled the sky. Zeros twisting, P-38s diving away. Tracers crossing in every direction. Then he saw another one, a Zero below him, trying to regain altitude. Walsh pushed the nose down. This time the Japanese pilot saw him coming. The Zero broke hard, turning desperately, climbing and rolling in an attempt to escape. But the Corsair was faster. Walsh closed the distance, inch by inch. He fired. The third Zero caught fire and spiraled downward, trailing smoke all the way to the ocean. 3 Zeros. Gone. The entire engagement lasted only minutes. By the time the Japanese pilots disengaged, nearly 20 of their aircraft had been destroyed. VMF 124 had not lost a single pilot. The Zeros broke formation and retreated north. The battle was over. Walsh rejoined his flight and headed back toward Guadalcanal. As his Corsair descended toward Henderson Field, the significance of what had just happened began to sink in. He wasn't a rookie anymore. He had survived his first real air battle. And more than that, he had killed 3 enemy fighters in a single engagement. The victory meant far more than the score. It proved something that many still doubted. The Corsair wasn't a failure. It wasn't a death trap. In the hands of a pilot who understood it, who respected its speed, its climb, its aggression, it was superior to the Zero. Word spread quickly. Through VMF 124, through marine aviation, through the Pacific. The aircraft the Navy had rejected could fight, and Kenneth Walsh had just shown them how. But this was only the beginning. 6 weeks after his first victories, Kenneth Walsh was back in the air over the Solomon Islands. By now, combat patrols were no longer novelties, they were routine. Escort the bombers, cover the patrol aircraft, intercept anything hostile. This mission was another escort flight, B-24 bombers heading once again toward Kahili Airfield. The same airfield, the same danger. The early portion of the mission was uneventful. The bombers held formation. The Corsairs flew high cover. The sky seemed calm. Then the calm broke. Japanese fighters were climbing to intercept. Fresh Zeros, aggressive pilots, well coordinated. They had altitude. They had numbers. They had the sun behind them. For many pilots, this was the moment when instinct took over. Turn hard, stay close, fight it out. Walsh did the opposite. He climbed hard. He refused the turning fight. He preserved his speed. He waited. A Zero peeled off and dove toward the bombers. Walsh rolled inverted and followed. He lined up the shot and fired. The Zero disintegrated. Walsh pulled up sharply, climbing away before any enemy could latch onto his tail. Below him, another Zero tried to follow. It couldn't. The Corsair's climb rates left it behind. Walsh rolled again, dove again, fired again. Another Japanese fighter spiraled down, trailing smoke. The third Zero tried to escape vertically, pulling into a steep climb. Walsh followed, engine screaming, airspeed bleeding, but still faster. He fired a short burst. The Zero stalled, rolled, and fell. 3 kills, again. The engagement broke apart moments later. The bombers pushed through. The remaining Zeros disengaged. Walsh regrouped with his flight and headed home. On the ground, the numbers were tallied. Walsh's total now stood at 6 confirmed victories. In the language of air combat, 5 kills made you an ace. Walsh had passed that threshold. He was the first pilot in the United States Marine Corps to become an ace flying the F4U Corsair. But to Walsh, the number mattered less than the proof. Every mission reinforced the same conclusion. The Corsair, when flown correctly, was dominant. Back at Henderson Field, the atmosphere changed. The early fear was gone. The doubt had faded. The pilots now trusted their aircraft. They trusted its speed, its climb, its firepower. They trusted Walsh's methods, fast, high, relentless. Through late spring and into the summer of 1943, Walsh continued flying combat missions, interceptions, escorts, patrols. The victories accumulated steadily. Zeros fell. By August 12th, Walsh's score reached double digits. In just 6 months of combat, he had become one of the most successful fighter pilots in the Pacific theater. But what happened next would elevate him beyond ace status. It would place him into legend. By late August, the tempo of the air war had intensified. Japanese air power in the Solomons was weakening, but it wasn't broken. What remained were experienced pilots, flying fewer aircraft, taking greater risks. And on August 30th, Kenneth Walsh flew into one of those risks head-on. The mission that morning was an escort. Marine Corsairs were assigned to protect a formation of bombers striking Japanese positions near Bougainville. It was supposed to be routine. Nothing about it was. Walsh was flying high cover, above the bombers watching the upper sky. That was where danger came from. That was where he lived. The formation pressed north. The ocean below was calm. The clouds were thin. Visibility was excellent, too excellent. Enemy fighters inbound, fast, numerous. Walsh scanned the horizon. Then he saw them. A large formation of Japanese fighters climbing aggressively. Zeros and older models mixed together, using altitude and sunlight to mask their approach. They weren't trying to harass the bombers. They were trying to overwhelm the escort. Walsh had seconds to decide. He didn't call it in. He didn't wait for confirmation. He pushed the throttle forward and climbed. Straight into them. The Corsair surged upward. The enemy pilots saw him, a single aircraft climbing directly toward their formation. They broke. Too late. Walsh rolled over at the top of his climb and dove. The first Zero crossed his gun sight. A short burst, The aircraft shattered. The second tried to turn inside him. It couldn't. Walsh fired again. Another Zero went down in flames. 2 kills in seconds. The sky exploded into chaos. Enemy fighters scattered. Marine Corsairs dove and climbed through the formation. Tracers laced the air. Walsh pulled up, climbing hard, but this time something was wrong. His engine sputtered. Then came the smell. Smoke. A hit. Fuel line. Oil pressure dropping. Walsh had a choice. Break off. Or stay. He stayed. Another Zero flashed below him. Walsh rolled, ignoring the engine warnings. He fired. The third Japanese fighter fell away, smoking heavily. The Corsair shuddered. The engine was failing. Oil sprayed across the windshield. Fire licked along the cowling. Walsh should have bailed out. He didn't. He saw another Zero. And then another. They were pressing the bombers. Walsh dove again. He fired until the guns clicked empty. The fourth Zero spiraled downward. A fifth followed moments later, exploding after a sustained burst. 5 kills in one mission. With a burning aircraft, the Corsair was dying. Flames crept back toward the cockpit. Smoke filled the canopy. Walsh finally turned south. The ocean waited below. He jettisoned the canopy. The heat was unbearable. At barely 1,000 feet, Walsh rolled the Corsair inverted and jumped. The parachute snapped open. Below him, his aircraft struck the water and vanished. Walsh hit the sea moments later. Alone, he floated for hours. The sun burned. The salt stung. Enemy patrol boats could appear at any moment. Eventually, a marine rescue plane spotted him. Walsh was pulled from the water, burned, dehydrated, exhausted, but alive. The tally was unprecedented. 5 enemy fighters destroyed in a single day, while flying a damaged aircraft, while on fire, while refusing to disengage. His total now stood at 21 confirmed victories. He was no longer just an ace. He was one of the deadliest fighter pilots in Marine Corps history. The burns healed. The exhaustion faded. But the war wasn't over, and neither was Walsh. By the time Kenneth Walsh returned to duty, his name was already moving faster than he was. Combat reports had spread through the chain of command. Squadron logs, after-action summaries, witness statements. They all said the same thing. August 30th hadn't been bravery. It had been something rarer. Sustained aggression under certain death. 5 enemy aircraft destroyed. Aircraft lost. Pilot rescued. The numbers were stark. But numbers couldn't explain why he stayed in the fight. They couldn't explain why he pressed the attack while his engine burned. That part, the part that mattered, had to be understood by men who had been there. And they did. The recommendation moved upward, from squadron, to group, to wing, to headquarters. It didn't stall. It didn't get diluted. It went straight to the top. The Medal of Honor. For the United States Marine Corps, it was rare. For a fighter pilot, rarer still. For actions in the air, almost unheard of. But the evidence was undeniable. Walsh had done what few could imagine, and he had lived. In February 1944, Kenneth Ambrose Walsh stood in Washington, D.C., not in a cockpit, not under fire, but in dress uniform. The room was quiet, too quiet. President Franklin D. Roosevelt stepped forward. The citation was read aloud, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. As the words continued, Walsh barely moved. 5 enemy aircraft, damaged plane, flames, refusal to disengage. The story was being frozen into official language, reduced to ink, to something permanent. The medal was placed around his neck. Applause followed. Walsh didn't smile. He wasn't thinking about heroism. He was thinking about the men who hadn't come back. After the ceremony, Walsh became something else. A symbol. The Marine Corps sent him on tours, airfields, training commands, war bond rallies. He stood in front of young pilots who stared at him with a mixture of awe and fear. They wanted to know how to do it, how to fight and live. Walsh told them the truth. Don't turn, don't get slow, use altitude, use speed. And remember, you're not invincible. The pressure was heavier now. Every mission he flew carried expectation. Every takeoff felt watched. But Walsh still wanted to fly combat. He asked to return. Again, and again, and again. Eventually, command said no. They needed him alive. For a man who had built his identity in the sky, grounding felt like loss. He had survived what should have killed him. Now he had to live with it. When the war finally ended, it didn't arrive with celebration for everyone. For Kenneth Walsh, it arrived quietly. No engine noise, no radio calls, no reason to climb. The Pacific went still, and with it, the thing that had defined him for years disappeared. He returned home carrying something invisible. Not medals, not titles, memory. The war had taken enough men. It had given him survival instead. And survival was complicated. Like many combat pilots, Walsh struggled to fit into peace. The urgency was gone. The clarity was gone. In the air, everything had been simple. Fast or dead, high or vulnerable. On the ground, nothing was. He stayed with aviation. He couldn't leave it completely. He flew when he could. He trained pilots. He worked in civilian aviation roles. The sky remained familiar, even when the purpose changed. Time moved forward. The war receded into history. But his name didn't fade. Marine Corps pilots learned it in classrooms. Historians wrote it into books. The Corsair became legend, and Walsh was inseparable from it. He had been there when the aircraft was doubted, when it was feared, when it was almost discarded. He proved what he could do, not through theory, but through combat. Kenneth Walsh lived a long life, long enough to watch the world change, long enough to see aviation become safer, faster, quieter, long enough to know that what he had done could never be repeated. The conditions were gone, the wars were different, the sky had changed. He died in 1998 at the age of 82, not in the air, not in fire, but in peace. Kenneth Walsh didn't chase legend. He chased altitude. He chased speed. He chased survival. The legend followed anyway.